American plus-sized model Tess Holliday appeared on the front cover of Cosmopolitan back in 2018. The aim was to inspire readers to love their bodies, whatever their shape.
Well, now the activist has revealed her diagnosis of atypical anorexia, but she says she's been accused of lying because she doesn't fit the stereotype of someone with an eating disorder. Tess joins us now this morning. Good morning to you, Tess.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you on the show this morning. I'd imagine that most people waking up this morning and hearing this, that you have atypical anorexia, but having an idea of what we assume that means physically to actually the difference when we look at various shapes of bodies, will be quite surprised by this. How did you feel when you were given the diagnosis?
I mean, just the same as everybody else watching. I was confused. I didn't understand. I was a little bit angry. You know, I thought I knew my body really well. So to hear the diagnosis was really jarring.
So what would have been your understanding of somebody who was experienced atypical anorexia until you heard that you had it?
I mean, typically in media, we've been presented with folks that are extremely underweight, but that's part of why I had no idea that I could even struggle with anorexia. So, you know, that's part of why I wanted to share my story, because I know my body very well. I knew myself very well. So to hear that I could be, you know, living in a larger body and struggling with a disorder that's been presented differently really threw me for a loop. And I figured other people were dealing with the same thing.
It's a really important issue to speak about because, as you say, you don't fit the stereotype of how we might imagine someone suffering that particular eating disorder. What were your symptoms? What did you present with, and how did you get to that diagnosis?
I got to that diagnosis because I've been struggling with the eating disorders most of my entire life. I restricted. I wouldn't eat. I would go sometimes an entire day without eating anything. And I was hungry. I knew I was hungry, but in a way, I think, you know, I kind of wore it as a badge of honor that I was like this person in a larger body not eating. And you know, people in my life would say, oh, Tess, you know, she doesn't eat that much. And, you know, I kind of normalized that, which is my bad. But now that I know, I'm able to do something about it. And, you know I've been on your program a lot over the years, yeah. Not like in person, but, you know, you guys have talked about me a lot. Susanna, you have, you know, always held it down for me, so thank you. But, you know, everyone is pretty familiar with my story, but to hear that I was struggling with, you know, what I've been dealing with, I know is really shocking, but I'm healthier and happier than I've been in my entire life.
Yeah. Tess, well, I understand that you've had quite a lot of backlash since you've come out and explained that you have this diagnosis. People thinking that you're lying, that you're just doing it for sympathy or for publicity, because how could possibly somebody who is plus size like yourself have an eating disorder?
I mean, listen, I would much rather be doing things for publicity than this, right? This is not a fun thing to be talking about, but the reality is, you know, if someone that can be as knowledgeable about their body and body positivity and loving yourself, if I can be struggling with an eating disorder like anorexia, I know that there's other people that are dealing with it. So for me, it's been much more empowering to be able to share my story. I mean, I have gotten a lot of people that have messaged me saying, you know, there was a gentleman today that said, I held my best friend who passed away at, you know, 90 pounds. I don't know what that is, translate. And, you know, how dare you lie about this? And that's really hard to hear, but this is my reality and this is my truth, and it needs to be talked about because there's other folks that are experiencing what I'm experiencing and we're just not seeing it.
Yeah, to be accused of lying when you have been given a diagnosis is a very difficult thing. Yeah. We have Dr. Hilary here, our resident GP. Dr. Hilary, eating disorders can manifest in lots of different ways, but people wouldn't assume that anorexia would manifest itself in a plus-size body.
Right. Yeah.
But this is atypical anorexia, and it is significantly, you know, as Tess talks about, it's about restricting your eating. But just explain how that happens, and your, you know, the size that Tess is.
So these labels aren't particularly helpful. Eating disorders comprise a spectrum of eating disorders which include bulimia, anorexia, obesity itself, and there's always a psychological element. And in those elements, there are a number of things which they have in common. For example, there would be a fear of being fat or gaining weight. There would be a body dysmorphia, a distorted body image. There would be restrictive and abnormal eating habits. And those things are common to all of these eating disorders. Now, whilst the official categorisation of eating disorders doesn't often include atypical anorexia, it does include something called other specified feeding and eating disorders, of which this is one. So we can call it atypical anorexia, which people will still be confused about because they associate the word anorexia with starving yourself to death, potentially, and being severely underweight. But weight alone is not a defining reason for a diagnosis.
Right.
So you can be overweight and still have restrictive eating patterns, abnormal thoughts about eating, abnormal behaviours about eating, and I think that's what Tess is talking about.
Yeah.
And she's right, it's important that we talk about this.
It is really important. Tess, this past year in lockdown has been a challenge for a lot of people, and particularly people suffering from eating disorders. How has it been for you? How have you managed that?
You know, I think that the pandemic was really a blessing for myself because it allowed me to slow down for the first time in my entire career and really reflect back on myself. And it was through that kind of downtime that I realized that something wasn't okay with me. I didn't feel good. I just wasn't myself. And so I reached out to the dietitian, who initially is the one that told me, hey, I think you need to see somebody, because if I could diagnose you, I would diagnose you as anorexia type A. And you know, hearing that was really difficult, but I was able to get that diagnosis, which is what I want to talk about, that there's so many folks that aren't getting the diagnosis due to weight bias stigmas.
We're going to be talking to Joe Marler shortly, who you may or may not be aware of, Tess, but he's an international rugby player who has struggled with his own mental health and has been through some real battles. And one of the things that Joe talks about is once he got some diagnosis and he sought some help, he was given a plan of how he could start trying to sort out the issues he was dealing with. And as difficult as it was to get that diagnosis, how much has it helped you now with your own mental well-being and your physical health in terms of sort of looking forward?
It's been revolutionary. Because of getting the diagnosis, I finally understood that I am fat because I was starving myself. And that's really hard for people to understand. And I know that's not the case for everybody, but for me, I was restricting so much that I was harming my body. So now I'm able to feed my body, take away the guilt from it, and take care of myself in the way that I need. And you know, I feel better, and I feel like it shows, and I want that kind of peace and happiness for other people that I robbed myself of.
I know that men are also affected by body image and in increasing numbers as well, but women's bodies are constantly scrutinised, aren't they? And I can't imagine many people's bodies are scrutinised as much as yours is. When people talk about your weight, your size, constantly, what impact does that have on you and how you feel about yourself?
Listen, I'm a tough cookie. I feel like if I wasn't, I wouldn't be able to sit here with y'all today. But you know, I would be lying if I said it didn't affect me. And I do believe that social media has played a role into my disordered eating. It's extremely hard to, you know, want to talk about my successes in my career and the positive that I'm trying to do in the world, and it's always minimized and diminished by my size and perceived health. So it kind of feels like no matter what you do, it's just an uphill battle. And so, you know, it's been really empowering to kind of take control of my own life and my own truth. But it's really challenging.
And I was interested to see as well that you feel like you're feeling considerably better, you're seeing a dietitian, you're eating more healthily, and as a result you are losing weight as well. Not because you're weighing yourself, just because naturally you're giving your body what it needs to exist without sort of forcing it into any sort of combative situations.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what spurred all of this, is that I was getting a lot of comments from people about, you know, my weight loss and my body changing, and it made me uncomfortable because I think that we should be able to compliment people and not mention their size or you know, perceived health. So I kind of just posted saying like, hey, can we stop talking about my body? And I'm actually recovering from an eating disorder. But it kind of blew my mind that I could, you know, my body could change and shift by feeding it more. And, you know, I'm just glad that I'm able to talk about this with you guys.
Yeah, and I mean, I've always thought that it's really important we don't shame people for their sizes, we don't criticise people, we support people. Because the key thing is being healthy, isn't it? No matter what size. Do you feel healthy right now?
I mean, health is kind of a slippery slope, because I do think that there are a lot of people that you know, are predispositioned to not be able to be healthy. There's like medical conditions and things like that. So I want to be mindful of that. But for my personal self, I don't like to use the word healthy for those reasons. But for me personally, I do feel healthy, and I feel very aligned with my body, both mentally and physically. And I think that that's most important.
Yeah. Well, I think what you know, the way that you've spoken out about it is really important. It's important we don't have stereotypes around these disorders. And I'm sure that what you've said will help. But when you speak out, Tess, there is always a backlash, isn't there? Do you expect people, you know, having seen this interview, will then sort of, you know, talk to you again and take issue with what you're saying?
Listen, we all know that there's people out there that are miserable regardless of what they do, and yeah, there's always going to be people that aren't going to get what I'm doing. But at the end of the day, I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing that for, you know, for people that are watching this and saying like, hey, I'm dealing with that, or that person looks like me, and that makes me feel less alone. So, you know, I welcome the criticism, but I'm not going anywhere.
Do you know what, Tess, to be able, as you suggest, to be able to get to the point where we can interview and talk to you about some of the success and some of the exciting things you're doing, regardless of your shape or size or body, is where we all want to get, isn't it? That's the sort of that's what we're all striving for. And hopefully, next time you come on the show, we can do just that, and it will be about one of the things that you've done, which is be incredible, rather than having to talk personally about your own health. So,
but I know that you wanted to come on to talk specifically about that, and so we're honouring that today. Tess, good to see you. Looking fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Nice to see you.
Tess Holliday, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Dr. Hillary, restrictive eating is the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and while she's feeling healthier, she can't say she's healthy, because otherwise it wouldn't need treatment, and it does. It is an eating disorder which has ramifications physically and mentally, and therefore the psychological counselling plus help from a dietitian is absolutely paramount. But she's right to bring this out into the open, because many, many people have an eating disorder which is undiagnosed, under-recognised, and can cause misery. But it's treatable. And it's really important that people come forward. And I think the
other thing that's really counterintuitive is hearing Tess say, you know, she's fat, but she's starving her body. You know, our natural, what we've all been sort of taught to understand is the less food you give yourself, the less weight you're going to put on. And clearly there is an issue there that we need to understand.
That still holds true, but you can restrict yourself from eating for days and then binge.
And then eat the wrong thing.
And hence the overlap with bulimia. Right. So it's about abnormal eating patterns all the time. She's now eating more frequently, but the right foods and the right amounts.
Nourish
and that's
yourself.
The difference.
Yeah. let's make sure that we put details of support groups on our website, itv.com/helplines. If you're struggling in the same way, it's absolutely vital to get support, and there is help and support out there.